He has been known as the Man of Steel, the last son of Krypton, the Man of Tomorrow, the Big Blue Boy Scout. But to the world, he is best known as Superman. Created by writer Jerry Siegel and artist Joel Shuster, the character first appeared in comics in 1938 and is often regarded as the original and definitive comic book superhero. Superman has been adapted in various media over the decades, including comics, radio serials, animation, TV series, and some low-budget feature films in the late 1940s and early 1950s. It wasn't until the release, however, of Richard Donner's big-budget feature film Superman in 1978 that the character's popularity went into the stratosphere and set the standard for all superhero movies for decades to come. In this video, I'm going to be ranking all the Superman feature films since 1978 from worst to best. All 8 of them. Yes, you heard that right. 8. Some may feel that a few of the entries on this list shouldn't be here, but these are just my opinions only. Now, I know what you're all thinking. Surely Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, must be at the bottom of this list, right? Wrong! Number 8, Superman Returns. By the time Superman Returns was released in 2006, it had been nearly 20 years since the Man of Steel had been on movie screens. Bryan Singer, the acclaimed director of the first 2 X-Men films, decided to pass on the third X-Men movie and make his own sequel, remake, reboot, whatever to the original Superman films. The movie has Superman returning to Earth after a 5-year absence, only to find that Lois Lane has moved on with her life, has had a child, and that his arch-nemesis Lex Luthor is planning to use Kryptonian technology to reshape North America. The problem with Superman Returns is with its conception. Singer has said that his movie is the quote-unquote real sequel to 1981 Superman 2 and set in the same universe. There are so many problems with this. At the end of Superman 2, after saving the world from General Zod, Superman lands on the White House, returns the American flag, and promises the president,
"Sorry I've been away so long. I won't let you down again."
So in Bryan Singer's Superman Returns, the film depicts that after that, Superman left Earth for 5 years to see if there was anything left of Krypton. Not only is this utterly stupid, as he should know by now that there's nothing left of Krypton but rubble, but he leaves Earth completely undefended, including Lois Lane and his mother. Not only that, the movie depicts Superman as a jealous stalker. On his return, he finds Lois has had a child and now has a fiancée. Superman constantly spies on Lois using his X-ray vision, and even creeps around outside her house at night. This is supposed to be Superman, right? Not only that, the film just comes across as a lame rehash of Richard Donner's original classic film, using the same dialogue and jokes in many scenes.
You really shouldn't smoke, Miss Lane.
You really shouldn't smoke, Miss Lane.
Lex Luthor plans yet another real estate scam by causing earthquakes. Superman knows from the events of Superman 2 that Luthor knows where his Fortress of Solitude is, and he doesn't ensure the place has any security. It seems that just about anybody can walk in there and take what they want. None of this makes any sense. Don't even get me started on the revelation that Lois's child turns out to be Superman's. Lois seems genuinely surprised by this. How could she not know? Finally, the movie is just really, really boring. The only really exciting action sequence is the plane rescue, which is genuinely great. But most of the action in this film consists of Superman just lifting heavy objects, including an entire mountain filled with kryptonite, a single shard of which caused him to lose his powers 20 minutes earlier. Brandon Routh is a decent actor and could have made a decent Superman if he had been allowed to play his own take on the character, rather than the impression of Christopher Reeve he was directed to do. Kate Bosworth is completely miscast as Lois Lane, being far too young to play a veteran reporter. She looks barely old enough to have graduated from college. Overall, Superman Returns is by far the worst Superman film ever made, in my opinion. Number 7, Superman 3. After the success of the first 2 Superman films starring Christopher Reeve, the ideas for Superman 3 involved villains like Mr. Mxyzptlk and Brainiac. Supergirl was supposed to make an appearance as the adopted daughter of Brainiac. Also, Supergirl was supposed to fall in love with Superman, and they were supposed to get married. I'm assuming they weren't cousins in this version of the script like they are in the comics. I hope they weren't anyway. Brainiac was supposed to use a personality machine to turn Superman evil, and a certain version of this ends up in the finished film, with Superman exposed to a form of kryptonite. Unfortunately, the film's producers Alexander and Ilya Salkind saw an interview with Richard Pryor on television where he said he'd love to be in a Superman film, so they cast him in Superman 3. Here's the problem. Superman 3 is not a Superman movie. It's a Richard Pryor comedy with Superman as the guest star. There is no plot really, just Richard Pryor's character Gus becoming a computer genius for some reason, and getting hired by a Lex Luthor wannabe to reprogram computer systems to make money for him. Then Gus designs a supercomputer on the back of table napkins. It's never actually explained how Gus is able to do this, and the computer becomes self-aware and tries to take over the world because, yeah, it's just complete nonsense, and sounds like they just made it up as they went. Oh, I almost forgot. There actually is a subplot in this movie involving the character Superman, where he reconnects with an old flame from his hometown of Smallville. This section of the movie is actually quite decent, with Reeve portraying Clark Kent as more of a mature and less of a bumbling idiot. The whole plot strand of Superman turning evil after kryptonite exposure is the best aspect of the film, with Reeve clearly enjoying the opportunity to play Superman as an asshole and creepy sadist. The scene where Superman is split into two personalities is a terrific action sequence, one of the highlights of all the Superman films. Overall, however, Superman 3 is a mess of a film, and horribly misjudged. The movie does have its good moments, and I have to admit it is a guilty pleasure for me, but considering that they had the entire history of DC Comics to draw on, and this is what they came up with, yeah, it's very disappointing. Number 6, Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. Superman 4 is a movie that's very hard to defend. Christopher Reeve's fourth and final appearance as the Man of Steel was produced by the infamous Israeli cousins Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus. After Superman 3 underperformed at the box office in 1983, it seemed that the Reeve era of the Superman films was over, until the rights to the series were sold to Golan and Globus. Reeve was enticed back to play Superman with a large fee, along with director and story approval. Reeve wanted the film to be about the nuclear arms race, and the film was given a high, for the time, production budget of $36 million. The story involves Superman trying to stop World War III breaking out by ridding the world of nuclear weapons, and Lex Luthor creating a villain called Nuclear Man to destroy Superman. Just before production began, Golan Globus slashed the budget down to $17 million. Since the script was written with a high production budget in mind, the film comes across as very cheap, with terrible special effects work done by inexperienced crews. On top of all that, the film had more than 40 minutes of footage deleted after terrible test screenings. There were originally 2 different nuclear men in the film, but one was completely cut out of the final cut of the movie. To be fair, it was probably for the best, as that footage that's now available on all home media releases looks terrible. He makes the nuclear man that's in the release version of the film look like Sherlock Holmes. Despite all the film's flaws, I have to say I have some nostalgic love for this film. Christopher Reeve is as good as ever in the role, and I find it hard to dismiss the film's message of nuclear disarmament, a theme that's just as relevant today as it ever was. Also, Alexander Courage's musical score to the film is absolutely fantastic. He takes themes that were created by John Williams and expands on them brilliantly. As poor as the special effects are, I think the action scenes are actually quite creative in concept. I especially like the fight between Superman and Nuclear Man on the moon, which is quite brutal. The Blu-ray version of this movie is the best possible way of watching Superman 4, as it has some of the special effects, such as visible wires removed, and the redone colour correction hides the curtains that were previously visible during the scenes set in the moon. All in all, Superman 4 may have been a disaster, but at about 90 minutes long, it's short at least, and it won't bore you to death like Superman Returns does. Number 5, Superman 2. The first 2 Superman movies were filmed back-to-back in the late 1970s. With filming falling behind, the producers decided to concentrate on finishing the first film, reasoning that if Superman the movie flopped, there wouldn't be the need for a sequel. As it happens, the first film directed by Richard Donner was a huge success, so naturally the producers fired him and hired Richard Lester to direct the remainder of Superman 2. The 3 Kryptonian criminals seen in the first movie escape from the Phantom Zone and try to conquer Earth just as Superman gives up his powers to be with the love of his life, Lois Lane. Superman 2, the theatrically released version of it at least, is a strange mishmash of a film, not surprising considering it's the work of 2 different directors. There are parts of this movie that are genuinely thrilling, and even quite dark, such as Zod and his companions killing astronauts on the moon. These kind of scenes are directed by Donner. There are other scenes directed by Lester that have these ridiculous over-the-top comedy moments that would later plague Superman 3. Superman 2 started a trend with a lot of later comic book movies, with the hero giving up his powers only to get them back to fight the main villain in the end. Examples of this are the likes of Spider-Man 2 and Wonder Woman 1984. Overall, it's a very enjoyable movie with lots of great action. Strangely enough, it's the movie that a lot of Man of Steel haters seem to forget when they criticise that movie. Superman flies right into the centre of Metropolis and challenges 3 superpowered villains to a fight, resulting in huge amounts of property damage and threat to human life. Also, Superman crushes the hand of a fully depowered General Zod and throws him to his death. Yes, I know there is deleted footage that shows the 3 criminals survived, but it was deleted, so they don't count. Long before #release the Snyder Cut became a thing, an internet campaign was launched in the early 2000s to release Richard Donner's cut of the film. More on that in a minute. Number 4. Batman v Superman Ultimate Edition. Now I know I'm probably cheating here. It can be argued that BVS doesn't actually count as a Superman movie, given that it's often regarded as a team-up movie, featuring him along with the likes of Batman and Wonder Woman. But bear with me for a minute here. Zack Snyder's second movie in the DCEU is a sort of sequel to his Man of Steel, where Batman and Superman, after the events of the Kryptonian attack on Earth, are manipulated into fighting each other by Lex Luthor. The theatrical cut of this movie is, in my opinion, a Batman movie, with Superman as an important supporting character. However, the Ultimate Edition cut of the movie released in home media is more of a Superman movie, with Batman as an important supporting character. Most of the deleted material concerns Superman's part of the story and makes the plot much clearer. This movie may be a little too serious and dark for some, but I really love it. Some may question the wisdom of combining elements from several major DC storylines in one film, such as the death of Superman and The Dark Knight Returns. But I think it all ties together really well. It not only introduced the most comic-accurate portrayal of Batman and Ben Affleck, but also introduced Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman in a great way. If you were lucky enough to avoid the trailers, that is. What lets the movie down slightly is that it doesn't really work as a standalone story, and Man of Steel is pretty much required viewing to best enjoy it. Like that movie though, time is being kind to BVS, and its reputation is only going to grow. Number 3. Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut. What is it about movies involving Superman and lost director's cuts? Long before release of Snyder Cut was a thing, the theatrically released version of Superman 2 in 1980 was the result of 2 directors, Richard Donner and Richard Lester. Donner was the director of Superman 2, until he either quit or was fired, depending on who you ask, and Lester was brought on to finish the film. While Superman 2 was released to positive critical and audience acclaim, looking at it today, knowing what went on behind the scenes, you can see the artistic vision of 2 directors clashing against each other. Lester's cut had more campy and comedic aspects, which would become very prevalent later in Superman 3, which he had full control over. Donner's cut of the film, finally released after a long internet campaign, is more hard-edged, with less childish humour, and even brings back Marlon Brando's Jor-El. Brando's scenes were deleted from the theatrical cut of Superman 2 due to a pay dispute, and his scenes were replaced with Superman's mother, played by Susanna York. The result of this is a much more faithful sequel to Donner's original Superman film, and he even has several improved special effects shots. The only downside is that several scenes Donner wanted to include originally were not filmed before he left the production. So one key scene where Superman's identity is revealed to Lois Lane is conveyed by use of screen test footage. Also, the movie reuses the nonsensical time travel ending of the first movie. These are just minor nitpicks though. The movie has more emotional impact, especially due to Jor-El's farewell scene as he sacrifices himself to restore his son's powers. Richard Donner, like Zack Snyder many years later, is one of the true heroes in the history of Superman on screen. And this director's cut is a great legacy, not to just the character of Superman, but to the memory of Richard Donner himself. Number 2. Man of Steel. Honestly, the top 2 entries on this list can change places depending on the day, but for the moment, I'm putting Man of Steel as the second greatest Superman movie ever made. Zack Snyder's interpretation of Superman's origin story is a wildly different version of the character we saw in the Richard Donner original, going with the trend at the time for gritty realism, inspired by the likes of the Dark Knight trilogy and Casino Royale. Man of Steel is more of an alien first contact story rather than a traditional superhero movie. This movie was criticised at the time for being too different to what came before and being too serious. I find that pretty ironic, given that the fan backlash to Superman Returns in 2006 was that it was too much of a retread of Superman the movie from 1978. For me personally, I think Man of Steel is the most underrated Superman movie ever made. While its overall tone and approach was very different from what came before, I see that as a positive. The hopeful spirit of the Superman character is maintained, despite what its critics say. This story, in fact all three parts of what is now referred to as Zack Snyder's Justice League trilogy, is the story of the man becoming Superman. The religious aspects of the character are really played up here in a lot of the visuals and the dialogue. I've never understood the criticism that Superman doesn't care or save people in this movie. Fun fact, Henry Cavill's Superman saved more people in this film alone than Christopher Reeve did in his first film. Also, a lot of people complain about the level of destruction in Metropolis and that Superman didn't care about people buried under rubble. Does anybody remember what the Avengers went and did after the Battle of New York in that movie? Overall, Man of Steel is a fantastic first movie for Henry Cavill's Superman, and I can't wait to see what the long-awaited Man of Steel 2 will bring. Right, James Gunn? Number 1. Superman. So the top spot belongs to the original and best Superman movie from 1978. Director Richard Donner and creative consultant Tom Mankiewicz deserve most of the credit for taking a movie that could have just ended up being a silly and ridiculous looking kids movie to create a loving, nostalgic tribute to an American pop culture icon that had, at that time, existed for nearly 40 years. Superman is really 3 movies in one. The first part being a science fiction disaster movie set on the planet Krypton. The second being a slice of pure Americana set in Kansas following Clark Kent's teenage years. And the third part is pure comic book escapism as Christopher Reeve's Superman is revealed to the world. The heart of Superman's success, however, is the casting of Christopher Reeve as the Man of Steel. If this casting had gone wrong, the film, despite all its other attributes, just would not have worked as well. Many actors were considered for the role at the time, including Robert Redford, Burt Reynolds, James Caan, and even Sylvester Stallone. Reeve was a complete unknown at the time, and despite not being physically fit enough during the time of his screen test, he convinced the producers that he could play Superman, and hit the gym to get in shape as soon as he won the role. The true genius of Reeve's performance is that he takes such a potentially silly concept of Clark disguising his true identity with a pair of glasses and makes it believable. The scene where he almost gives his true identity away during the first date scene at Lois Lane's apartment is a true acting masterclass. John Williams' musical score is unforgettable. While Jerry Goldsmith was supposed to score the film originally but had to drop out due to scheduling, it's hard to imagine anyone coming up with a more iconic theme. Some say this theme should be used for every incarnation of Superman going forward, but I disagree. This theme belongs to Christopher Reeve's interpretation of Superman, in my opinion. The only real flaws of the movie are that during the Metropolis scenes, the film does focus a little too much on shadow comedy, and the turning back time climax just doesn't make any sense. These are minor flaws, however, and Superman remains a classic film, and quite possibly the best superhero movie ever made. And that is it for my worst to best ranking of all the Superman films. Do you agree? Disagree? Let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, then please click the like button, subscribe if you haven't done so already, and click the bell for notifications. Most importantly, I hope you all look after yourselves, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye for now.